In 1991, the Nancy Assize Court sentenced Simone Weber to 20 years imprisonment, guilty of having killed and then chopped up one of her former lovers, Bernard Hettler, with a concrete grinder. But before that, there were 5 years of investigation, 5 years of digging in search of a corpse that could never be formally identified. 5 years of face-to-face confrontation between an obstinate judge and this grandmotherly lady. 5 years and 25 lawyers, whom she fired one by one. 5 years, and in the end, a woman who still admits nothing. Then came a lengthy trial, one of the longest in the history of French justice, which she turned into a theater, and at the end of which she was convicted of murder, theft, possession of explosives, forgery, and destruction of evidence.
She's devilish, devilish, I tell you. What she did is unspeakable. She's devilish.
She's the devil himself.
Today, Simone Weber is free. She still claims to be innocent. More than ever, she looks like a kindly granny. And we still wonder how she could have done it. Simone Weber, did you kill your former lover Bernard Hettler?
Votre ancien amant, Bernard Hettler.
I didn't kill that man. How so? Well, I'm still convinced he's alive. I'm innocent, yes. I am. Why would I kill him?
It was the end of June 1985. Patricia Hettler was worried. For several days, she had had no news of her father, Bernard Hettler. So she decided to go to his home in Maxville, on the outskirts of Nancy.
I had a hunch. I was at home, and I said to myself, I've got to go and see. There's something wrong. I couldn't get him on the phone. He wasn't coming. So I went to see if he was home. He wasn't. I rang the bell, and, seeing that I insisted, the neighbors across the street took me in and said, well, come on in. That's when they told me they'd seen Simone Weber leave on Saturday morning with Dad.
Obviously, in a small street where everyone keeps an eye on each other, it hadn't gone unnoticed. The neighbors had seen the whole thing and told her all about the eventful morning.
They'd already seen Simone Weber early in the morning, in her car, watching, waiting. They saw Dad coming down the street. She got out of her car, and they got talking. They had a small altercation. They went inside, through that door there, and the door had been left a little ajar, so the neighbors heard a bit of shouting. The neighbor, who's a bit curious, approached. He heard them arguing. He didn't insist, and left. Maybe 15 minutes later, they'd both left in their cars, each with their own.
Have anyone seen your father since?
No.
Bernard Hettler was a 55-year-old divorced man who lived alone. 3 years earlier, he had had an affair with a woman his own age, a widow named Simone Weber. But the affair did not go well, and Bernard Hettler told those around him that he felt persecuted by this woman.
I knew she had been harassing him. She kept an eye on him day and night. She knew all about his comings and goings. She wrote down in a notebook what time he arrived home, when he left, when he went to someone's house. So when I found out he'd left with her, I was scared. She'd already tried to drug him several times, so...
Were you scared?
I was.
Bernard Hettler's new girlfriend, Monique Nuss, was also scared. On the evening of June 22nd at 7 p.m., she received an anonymous phone call. She immediately sent her son Didier to ring Simone Weber's doorbell.
We were worried about the absence of Bernard Hettler, who was due to go to the country with my mom that weekend. And someone phoned to say that Bernard wasn't coming.
Were you surprised?
Very much so.
But why research Simone Weber?
Because he had warned us that if anything happened, this person had to be investigated right away. He feared her. He was scared of her.
Simone Weber was not at home on Rue de Kronstadt. but she sometimes moved into her sister's old apartment on the other side of town. Didier Nuss immediately went there. When I arrived in front of Simone Weber's other home, at 158 Avenue de Strasbourg,
I first rang the doorbell. I didn't get a reply. And I noticed the curtains on the second floor moved slightly after I rang the doorbell.
And then Didier Nuss made a crucial discovery. On the opposite sidewalk, he recognized a blue Renault 9 car, Bernard Hettler's car. This proves that the man was indeed in the neighborhood on the evening of June 22nd.
The car was on the station's old parking lot in this very spot. I'm positive.
And where are we now in relation to Simone Weber's home?
Just a few dozen meters from her former home on Avenue de Strasbourg.
The trail to follow Bernard Hettler ended here. When Didier Nuss returned to the same spot a few hours later, the car had disappeared. Didier Nuss and his mother alerted Bernard Hettler's sisters. After 3 days with no news of their brother, they rang Simone Weber's doorbell and demanded to see the apartments.
We returned to Simone Weber's house on Rue de Strasbourg. To our surprise, there was very little light. In this apartment, her kitchen was flooded.
Her kitchen was flooded, as if washed with a lot of water because of a washing machine leak, Simone Weber explained. Her hands were bandaged because of a gardening accident, she said. Worried, the two sisters continued their tour of the apartment in the dark.
We thought she'd drugged him and that he was in a corner of the apartment. We went into the dining room, looked around the corners, right and left, and saw no one. We opened a cupboard, or rather a closet. It was filled with garbage bags. A heap of garbage bags. That's it.
No trace of Bernard Hettler. Simone sweared up and down that she hasn't seen him since their morning meeting in Maxville. The missing man's sisters left, but the suspicion remained. Finally, Bernard Hettler's daughter Patricia decided to call the police. It had been a week then since her father disappeared. But at the Nancy police station, her concerns are not taken seriously.
At first, they didn't take him into consideration because he was 50 years old. I think people are ready to do extensive search for a child, but for an adult, they can think that he simply left the area. I was told, your father is 50 years old, surely he left with a woman. He'd never leave like that, without his belongings.
You didn't believe it?
Not one bit.
Patricia Hettler did not give up. Since the police wouldn't listen to her, she turned to the press and put a wanted poster in the local newspaper. No response. Too bad. Then she'd lead the investigation herself.
I lead a whole personal investigation on my own. I dressed up, I disguised myself to follow Simone Weber, in the evening, at night, during the day. I hid, I followed her by car. I had friends lend me cars to change all the time. I wanted to follow her. I didn't want to miss anything. I wanted to see if she would lead me to something, or if she would perhaps lead me to a hiding place, a place where someone could be sequestered. But I actually couldn't find anything.
And then the missing man showed some sign of life, or so it seemed. His employer received a work stoppage in the post in Bernard Hettler's name. The boss immediately informed the family.
It wasn't Dad's handwriting. Half the information was missing. It wasn't his social security number. There were a lot of things wrong. Someone was impersonating him by sending a work stoppage. At that point, we went back to the police station. The employer told them too. And then they started to investigate.
We were thinking, sure, maybe it's huge, but it's definitely worth checking out. You can't say to a family, you're going to give us something this suspicious, and we're not going to do anything about it. It's inconceivable.
Strangely enough, the Bernard Hettler on the medical certificate was examined in the Paris suburbs, a long way from Nancy. The police tracked down the doctor and asked him about his patient.
The checks led us to a new surprise.
Les vérifications nous amènent à une nouvelle surprise.
The Bernard Hettler examined by the doctor on duty at Épinay-sur-Seine actually was a young man who was Ms. Weber's son-in-law.
Qui est jeune et qui est en fait le gendre de Madame Weber.
I have a small favor to ask of you. Could you impersonate Mr. Bernard Hettler, that is, to get a work stoppage? So I said to her, sure, I wouldn't mind, but I wouldn't really like it if I got into trouble. She said, don't worry, you won't get into trouble, I'll take responsibility. So I said, I don't mind.
Why have her son-in-law examined by a doctor in Épinay-sur-Seine, passing him off as Bernard Hettler, who had disappeared?
En le faisant passer pour Bernard Hettler, qui a disparu.
You get the impression that someone was trying to make people believe that Bernard Hettler was still alive. This is one of the main reasons why it seemed obvious that a criminal act should be considered.
2 weeks after Bernard Hettier's departure, a judicial investigation was opened into his kidnapping. This is a record time for a missing adult case. The family's stubbornness had a lot to do with it. Thus began one of the most exciting criminal investigations of the late 20th century.
Clearly, this wasn't an everyday occurrence. Most of all, I don't think we knew that we were embarking on years of work on this simple disappearance in the first place.
That would be an extraordinary investigation, headed by Judge Gilbert Thiel, known as the Sheriff. He has a reputation for being pugnacious and methodical. He's a judge who follows through on his investigations. He was faced with a woman whom everyone was already pointing to as the culprit, Simone Weber. However, he waited 4 months before questioning her, and the gamble was a daring one.
From the outset, there was strong pressure from the family to have Simone Weber arrested immediately. I opposed it because it wasn't the day after his disappearance, or even 2 days after. It had already been much more than a week. And I felt at the time that the potential benefits of an operation, i.e. a search of Simone Weber's various homes and bases, were not obvious, whereas time would allow us to try and get to grips with her personality and see a little of her comings and goings.
In the field, these two policemen, soon to become inseparable, started following in Simone's wake, Christian Jacques and Alain Lambolez. They had no idea that they've just landed the case of a lifetime. It was still a routine investigation then.
One of the first things we did was to try and track her from her various homes. And then we realized that it was quite difficult because she was very suspicious and made security moves, as thugs are wont to do when they're being followed. Sometimes she'd turn back, sometimes she'd stop abruptly for no particular reason. But in reality, she had spotted us and was playing cat and mouse with us.
From the very first days of the investigation, did you sense that you were under suspicion?
No, I just saw once that there was a car behind me, which I'd been seeing for a while by looking in the rear-view mirror. I stopped near a garage to have the tires reinflated and saw 2 men, inspectors who had been assigned to follow me, taking photos in my direction. So I looked
Did you wonder
everywhere.
what was going on?
I wondered what it was. So I paid attention. I didn't go back to the garage. I stopped at the Faculty of Pharmacy, parked the car, went into the faculty to see if that car, those people, were still there. Indeed, they were still there.
Did you make the connection with Bernard Hettier's disappearance?
Moderately.
The roles were reversed. Now the police felt spied on and watched by Simone Weber. They themselves couldn't believe it.
We were very surprised indeed. This is not the behavior of someone who is honest. What's more, coming from this sweet granny-looking woman, it was particularly striking for us.
The suspicious details were piling up. The lady lived mostly at night, moving from one home to another, from one phone booth to another. She switched cars as she switched identities. Here Simone Weber, elsewhere Miss Thuot or Monique Fixar. What she did and where she did was a mystery.
More and more, we were coming to see that the picture painted by members of the Hettler family, which we thought was a little excessive, that, in the end, it wasn't so excessive after all, because it was a perfect match for the worrying Ms. Weber.
Finalement, c'était pas si excessif que ça parce qu'elle correspondait tout à fait à cette personne tout à fait inquiétante qui était Madame Weber.
And then came that all-important testimonial from Simone Weber's downstairs neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Hag. On the afternoon of Bernard Hettler's disappearance, they saw a man enter the building with their neighbor, but never saw him come back down. And then the next evening, at around 10:30 p.m., a noise overhead startled them. A thud, like a falling body. And just after, the sound of some machine like a vacuum cleaner, but strangely not moving. Later, the stairwell light came on, and Mrs. Hag looked through the peephole. Weird. Simone Weber was dragging rubbish bags down, about 15 of them, in the middle of the night. She loaded them into her car before setting off in the early hours of the morning. 3 days later, Mrs. Hogg added that she had smelled blood coming from a rubbish bag on the sidewalk. For the police, it was almost too much.
When she saw that we were a little skittish about her explanation, she says it smelled of blood like when a woman has her period.
Son explication, eh ben oui, ça sentait le sang comme quand une femme a ses règles.
We were gradually beginning to think that she was not only sequestering him, she'd also made him disappear.
The police were then certain that Simone Weber had killed Bernard Hettler. But they had no proof, no material evidence.
The police department's instructions were clear. First, find the car. And all summer long, we looked for this car in parking lots in Cannes and Nancy, to no avail.
Cannes, because that's where Madeleine Weber, Simone's sister and confidant, lived. The two sisters were bugged, and all summer long, policeman Alain Lamboulez tried to decipher their often confusing conversation.
One evening, during a telephone call between Simone and Madeleine, Madeleine gave her sister the right numbers for the lottery. We were relatively attentive to this because we also play the lottery. And we realized that in this combination, there were several times the same number, or numbers greater than 49, which was not possible.
Il y avait plusieurs fois le même chiffre qui arrivait, ou alors des nombres supérieurs à 49, donc ça posait des problèmes.
These lottery numbers are very similar to a telephone number with an area code from Cannes. Bingo! It was the phone booth at the foot of Madeleine Weber's building. But even there, the two sisters feared being overheard, and their conversation remained enigmatic. On several occasions, they talked about a certain Bernadette, paying for her board and finding her a school for the new school year. For the policeman, Bernadette was a code name.
We thought, what if Bernadette were Bernard's car?
Ce serait pas la voiture de Bernard. Pourquoi
changing schools would mean changing parking locations?
Changer de lieu de stationnement.
And from there, we managed to crack the code.
On a réussi à craquer le code.
So, to find Bernadette's hiding place, the Cannes police started tracking Madeleine Weber. They saw her enter a real estate agency.
As soon as she came out, they went to ask around, and there they learned that this lady, Madeleine Weber, was pretending to be a Ms. Chevalier, and that she had come to renew the rental of a garage space in a residence in downtown Cannes.
Et qu'elle était venue pour renouveler la location d'un box de garage dans une résidence du centre-ville de Cannes.
The police immediately visited the garage, where they discovered Bernard Hettler's blue Renault 9, the Bernadette, fitted with false number plates.
There was no longer any room for doubt. They had some evidence in Cannes. We'd found the car, and that was a big part of the puzzle, even if we didn't yet have a body. We couldn't let the car go.
At that point, we finally had the grounds to ask the person in question for a number of explanations, saying, how is it that you find yourself in possession of this vehicle?
It was early November '85 when everything started accelerating. On the phone, Simone Weber, still tapped in, asked her sister to make some exhibits disappear.
She asked her to destroy Bernard Hettler's passport, checkbook, and any other items belonging to him.
Pièces appartenant en propre à Bernard Hettler.
And that's where we saw the real
On considère
urgency.
qu'il y a vraiment urgence.
In the final analysis, this was far from a simple case of disappearance. The neighbors of Bernard Hettler's ex-mistress witnessed a strange procession of garbage bags. Then there was the forged medical certificate and, last but not least, the Bernadette, Bernard Hettler's car, hidden by the Weber sisters in Cannes. Judge Thiel then had enough evidence to have Madeleine and Simone arrested. On November 8, 1985, the police took action. In Cannes and Nancy, they simultaneously arrested Madeleine and Simone Weber as they left their homes. They were pretty confident they had got what it takes to get them both to confess.
We were convinced that within a maximum of 48 hours, the case would be closed.
L'affaire allait sortir. C'était
For us, it didn't pose a problem a priori.
de problème a priori.
It's true that we thought, these two are grannies, two grandmothers. They'll soon confess. That's what we said to ourselves.
Policiers, on s'est dit, elles vont s'allonger rapidement, hein. C'est ce qu'on s'est dit.
In Cannes, Inspector Jacques and Commissioner Pegny Leclerc interviewed Madeleine Weber.
But Simone's younger sister had a cool head.
Initially, these were fairly common questions.
Relativement commune.
Do you know Bernard Hettler? Have you seen Simone Weber, your sister, recently? What do you know about Bernard Hettler's disappearance? A trivial question to get her to talk about the car. She swore up and down that she had nothing to do with it, that her sister had never asked her for any particular favor.
But when the police searched Madeleine's apartment, they found some damning documents, hastily hidden away.
We were surprised, half surprised, to discover a whole host of items that clearly belonged to Bernard Hettler, or that related to the vehicle's concealment.
Appartiennent à Bernard Hettler ou ont trait à la dissimulation du véhicule.
Among other things, it included a magnetic garage access card.
Hidden under a sofa cushion, Bernard Hettler's vehicle registration document and insurance certificate, and in a vase in the sideboard on the living room, the keys to the car, to the Bernadette.
What did Madeleine Weber say about it?
Madeleine Weber claimed to be surprised of having these objects in her home.
Madeleine was standing up to the police. She didn't know anything. She had no idea where Bernadette was hidden. So we took her to the garage, confronted her with its owner, showed her the car, and finally she broke down. Yes, she was the one who'd hidden the car. But, she said, it was as a favor to Bernard Hettler to prevent it from being stolen while he was away. So why put fake number plates on it? Why hide it in Cannes? No answer from Madeleine.
When faced with so much evidence, is a confession even necessary?
Les aveux sont-ils nécessaires?
You still have to explain why you have all this stuff at home and why you hide it so carefully.
Sur le fait de le cacher soigneusement.
Right from the start, we knew we'd have our hands full with Madeleine. And we knew that our colleagues in Nancy also had their hands full with Simone. We said to ourselves, with the two of them, we'll have a hard time, and then the future proved us right.
In Nancy, police officer Alain Lamboulez also made some strange discoveries, this time at Simone Weber's home.
It was quite surprising, because in the building, we found lots of documents, lots of old things. We also found weapons. Near the dining room window, there was a .22 long rifle with a silencer fitted on the barrel.
On trouve des armes aussi. Près de la fenêtre de la salle à manger, il y a une carabine 22 long rifle avec un silencieux ajusté sur le canon.
Ms. Weber was very sure of herself. She didn't understand how anyone could interfere with her routine. About Bernard Hettler, well, yes, he's an old friend, but he does what he wants. He's fickle. Surely he found some bird and left with her. Anyway, she gave no explanation.
Simone left her home in handcuffs. It won't be long, the policeman told her. In fact, she had just lost her freedom for many, many years. So this arrest, What happened the day they came to arrest you? At that point, what did you say to yourself?
Ah, but it went very well.
On pourrait presque dire très bien passé. Moi,
Since I had nothing to reproach myself for. When I got out at about 5, I went to my car and a man came up to me and said, "Do you have the car papers, ma'am?" And I said, "Of course," and it was pouring rain, so I said, "Look, it's dark in the street, come up if you'd like, because I can't see them in my bag," and I invited them to come up and then they started looking around and then he asked me a few questions.
Je les ai invités à monter. Et puis ils ont commencé à fouiller. Et puis me poser quelques questions.
What questions did he ask you?
Oh, I don't even know anymore.
Je ne sais même plus.
It was so vague.
Tellement été vague, tellement.
If I knew Bernard Hettler when I'd last seen him, I don't remember well because it was such a minor thing. It didn't make much of an impression on me alongside the other things.
Ça ne m'a pas marqué à côté des autres choses.
Then she would have to explain herself to the police and Judge Thiel.
A good police strategy was to start by asking her if she knew where Bernard Hettler's car was, if she had seen Bernard Hettler again, and so on. Because she didn't know that her sister had been arrested and the car found, and after 24 hours in police custody, she was still maintaining that she never saw Bernard Hettler's car again. And so we waited. We waited about 30 hours in police custody before submitting the elements to her. And that's where she tried to provide a number of explanations. She took Bernard Hettler's car so that it wouldn't be damaged by the savages, which wasn't what we called thugs in those days. But, well, anyway, explanations like that.
It was not credible because she had initially totally denied everything.
Parce que c'est dans un premier temps totalement nié.
And then came the explanations.
Arrivent les explications.
It's because we had dotted the I's and crossed the T's that she had to find an explanation.
Elle trouve une explication.
The policeman wasn't convinced, and the woman's attitude baffled him.
Still, I had some experience with moderately seasoned hoodlums.
De truands moyennement chevronnés.
I have to say that none of them ever made me feel as uncomfortable as Simone Weber did at certain moments in the auditions.
Que Simone Weber à certains moments des auditions.
She had a glare that made it clear she was not happy.
Qui indique bien qu'elle n'est pas contente.
When someone bothered her, she showed her displeasure.
Elle manifeste tout à fait son mécontentement.
In front of Judge Thiel, the two sisters were no more forthcoming, so they were incarcerated in Nancy prison. Simone Weber was charged with the murder of her former lover, and Madeleine with complicity.
As for the disappearance of Bernard Hettler, we had of course made some progress, because we had the car we had been desperately looking for several months, despite fraudulent maneuvers to hide it and make the passport and checkbook disappear.
Pour faire disparaître en plus le passeport, le chéquier.
We were thinking, why make the checkbook and passport disappear but keep the car papers? If they really thinks he's alive, why burn his checkbook? All this reinforced our hypothesis that Simone Weber had made him disappear. We didn't have a confession, of course, and not a shred of evidence for a homicide.
Now that Simone and Madeleine had confessed to nothing, we had to find evidence and gather testimonies. Roger Lapierre, Simone Weber's cousin and confidant, made a particularly interesting testimony. He recounted that on the evening of June 22nd, it was he who telephoned the Nuss family to tell them not to worry, that Bernard Hettler had left town.
He told us he hadn't thought much about it.
Spécialement à comprendre.
He told us he had done it to please his cousin.
Il avait fait ça pour être agréable à sa cousine.
He called on Simone Weber's orders and in her presence. But how did she know, from the evening of June 22nd, that Bernard Hettler would not be coming home? Another enigma is the discovery in the boot of Simone's car of a curious piece of machinery, an angle grinder, a tool for cutting metal and concrete. The invoice proved that Simone Weber had rented it on June 21, 1985, the day before Bernard Hettler's death. She then reported it stolen and had to pay for it 8 days later. So questions. Why did she keep it? And what could this dangerous tool have been used for?
This device could possibly have been used to dismember a corpse.
Avoir servi à démembrer un cadavre.
At this point, the police remembered the testimony of the downstairs neighbors about the strange noise they heard upstairs in Simone's apartment on the night of the argument with Bernard Hettler. What if this was the concrete grinder?
We thought about it because the neighbors had told us about a non-moving motorized device, which they had initially identified as a vacuum cleaner that made a lot of noise, but didn't move.
Un moteur qui ne se déplaçait pas, qu'ils avaient au départ identifié comme un aspirateur qui faisait beaucoup de bruit, mais qui ne se déplaçait pas.
Chainsaw Massacre. Journalists weren't really into nuance, and it doesn't matter if the machine isn't really a chainsaw, but a grinder. As for the Weber sisters, they were devils, Nancy's devils. And Simone intrigued them most.
As the media conducted parallel investigations into her personality, new discoveries were made beyond the crime itself. There were all the cases of forgery, concealment, and repeated lies that, in a way, helped build a kind of character.
De mensonges répétés qui nourrissent en quelque sorte un personnage véritablement qui s'impose.
Simone Weber might have been a deviole, but very amateurish. She hadn't thrown anything away, and her home was full of objects and documents, each more suspicious than the last.
We first found rubber stamps in a pressure cooker at her home on Avenue de Strasbourg. A pressure cooker full of official stamps from various town halls, Strasbourg, and other towns in the region. All official stamps that only belong in town halls, of course.
Blank prescriptions and prescription pads from different doctors were found.
Des blocs d'ordonnances de différents médecins.
Blank. Apparently, she'd stolen them from her doctor's visits. As soon as he turned his back, she'd stolen it from him.
And then we found drafts, falsified civil status certificates, marriage certificates.
Alongside the perfect forger's kit, they even found rifles and sticks of dynamite. Each time it's a new clue, a new lead to delve into the past of this extraordinary grandmother.
There was everything you need in this case to make a thriller, indeed. There was the environment, there was Simone Weber's past, which we gradually discover, with drama in her life involving her children, with a marriage that wasn't necessarily a happy one. It was very agitated. She was not someone who's had a quiet life so far. She was no ordinary lady, Simone Weber. She had her stories, her mysteries, her secrets.
Elle a des histoires derrière elle, elle a des mystères, elle a des secrets.
It has to be said that, at this stage of the investigation, the police must have been at a loss. How can we admit that behind this sweet granny's blue eyes may lie a murderer capable of cutting a man's body into pieces with a rented DIY machine? Who really is Simone Weber? It wasn't easy to discover her past. The only person she spoke to about her youth was Liliane Glock, her lawyer.
Ms. Weber herself is always keen to point out that she has a thoroughly honorable past. And personally, I'd add that she's had a number of difficulties in her life. You could simply say she was somewhat rabid at times.
Simone was born in 1929 in the Meuse region. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a factory worker. Hers was a broken home. She was 4 when her parents split up. Every human being has cracks, after all. Many people have cracks in their lives.
Nobody's perfect.
Were you a wounded girl?
I had a fairly happy childhood. My parents split up. I was very small. They shared the furniture and the children. Me and my sister were with Dad, who had rebuilt his life. The other 2 with Mom.
Yet it was a happy childhood.
Yes, because Dad had rebuilt his life. She was more than a mother. She was a person I continue to cherish.
It was during this period that the two sisters, Simone and Madeleine, became very close.
It's easy to imagine that when they were little girls, they had to keep each other's spirits up. As kids, it was perhaps a little difficult. They were already together. As young girls, they were still together. And then the two sisters married two brothers. The Weber sisters married the Thiot brothers. So it's a funny parallelism, but it's true that they've always been together.
I'll give you a little kiss, my sister. Goodbye.
Her sister's affection helped her overcome life's hard knocks. The failure of her first marriage, for example. Her husband, Mr. Thiot, has given her 5 children, but he is an unfaithful man whom she considers mediocre, and she kicks him out. Alone, with no real profession, she nevertheless managed to cope and raise her 5 children.
She was an enterprising person, which I don't think will surprise you. She had character, and she tried to set up some sort of small business. I think she even tried to set up a free newspaper, which wasn't a bad idea because at the time it was something new.
It was a failure, and the newspaper went bankrupt. She survived on makeshift jobs. She lived a lie, pretending to be a care assistant or a philosophy teacher. The truth is that she refinished used cars, bordering on the swindly.
She undoubtedly had an intellectual capacity a little above the average of the people she knew or who were in her immediate circle. But the problem was that she could never study, really push herself. She was a bit blackballed by existence, with odd jobs, unstable things. Great professional instability, sentimental instability too. And I think she was extremely frustrated.
Her life was marked by violent deaths. In 1968, her daughter Catherine died in her high school infirmary from an overdose of Theralin, used as a cough syrup. Whether negligence, accident, or suicide, Simone Weber was shattered by her death.
Her daughter's death was one of the decisive factors in what happened next. Firstly, because she felt immense personal despair. Of course she did. And then because, at that moment, she thought that the institution, that the educational and legal institutions had ganged up on her. It was the beginning of her paranoia.
And so began a surprising political episode. She joined the Maoists in the Truth and Justice committees. She wanted to do battle with the institutions. At the podium, she was eloquent but still undermined by the death of her daughter. And a few years later, she tragically lost a second child.
One of her sons committed suicide by shooting himself in the heart during his military service. She is a person who can be said to have had misfortunes.
Losing a child is the worst misfortune that can befall the father or mother of that child. And in this particular case, the mother, since she was the sole carer of her children. But losing 2. 2 of the 5 children she'd given birth to. It's something she'd always relived, something she'd always thought about at every moment of her life.
Was the mother of 2 deceased children an unhappy mother? Broken, shattered by life?
Yes, you know, Catherine's death was. At a parents' meeting, I was chatting with Ms. Lecenseur, whom I knew, and Francois arrived in tears, tears dripping down. He grabbed me, "Mom, come quickly, Catherine is dying in the infirmary." And so, when I arrived, she was being given artificial resuscitation, and when I saw that she was being given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, I ran back to Ms. Lecenseur to ask her to call the chaplain to come and give her extreme unction. And in the meantime, the parish priest had arrived. And when I was told there was nothing more to be done, I'd say, "My God, you can't do that, it's not possible. You don't have the right, don't take Catherine." It was, you know, it still is now, it's horrible.
You subsequently lost a second child, and nothing was ever the same again.
Nothing can ever be the same again. Philippe had been given a reprieve, both of them had been. He was 22, so he killed himself on his way to military service. He phoned us. I was at Mom's when they got the paper. Well, that's it, I'm off. I'll phone on Monday to say how's life at the army. Then by 8 o'clock, he was dead. And it was a second. Disaster is not the word. A heartbreak. You know, when someone says things like that to you, I don't think words can tell.
After these two tragic deaths, you're not the same woman you were before.
I am. I didn't go mad, as the other one said in the interview, making gestures where I might have lost my mind. Would I have gone to assassinate Bernard Hettler 28 years later? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Really?
It's crazy, putting two things together like that, it doesn't mean anything. Only mentally ill people would say things like that.
They say she suffered from her childhood, her life as a woman, her life as a mother. But I think that if you suffer that much, there is no point in making others suffer.
Digging into Simone Weber's past, the investigators were especially intrigued by her second marriage to Marcel Fixard, whom she met in the late 70s. He was a retired military man, widowed, childless, and the owner of a house in Rosières-aux-Salines, near Nancy.
Marcel Fixard had placed an ad for a personal assistant lady. And then, well, Simone Weber came along. I think she must have smelled a bargain. And let's not forget that she didn't have much income at the time. She wasn't working. She didn't have much money. So she must have thought, maybe I'll try to get hold of the old man.
A few months later, the personal assistant became Mrs. Fixard for a very secret marriage.
No one was aware that he intended to marry Simone Weber. It was a surprise for everyone, from the municipality at the time to the neighborhood and the family. When Marcel Fixard's wedding was announced, everyone was stunned.
Disturbingly, this wedding took place 100 kilometers away, in Strasbourg, and without any publication. The police found one of the witnesses to the ceremony.
We interviewed this witness at her home in Alsace, not far from Strasbourg. During our interview, she was shown a photograph of Mr. Fixard, a very contemporary photograph of the time of the wedding. And then, surprise, I don't know him. I've never seen him. He wasn't like that. And she began to describe a man who had nothing to do with Marcel Fixard.
Il était pas comme ça. Elle commence à nous décrire un homme qui n'avait rien à voir avec Marcel Fixard.
So Simone hired an extra to play her husband's role at City Hall. Probably this man, a resident of a hospice in Rosières. Marcel Fixard was 80 years old and renowned for his iron constitution. And yet, 3 weeks after his wedding, he died of a heart attack.
My uncle was in good health, so it's not right that he should die overnight.
C'est pas normal que du jour au lendemain, il meurt, si.
Wasn't he in poor health?
Oh no. He was standing up straight and everything.
How weird, especially since, a few days before the death of her pseudo-husband, Simone Weber had forged prescriptions with which she bought powerful drugs under a false identity.
We know she forged prescriptions because we have the templates. She made one and then it wasn't right. She borrowed it, and then she took another, and then we have the drafts. We have a few drafts of prescriptions for Digitalis.
Digitalis is a heart medication, an effective tonicardiac, as long as doses are respected.
Simone Weber was suspected of having poisoned her husband, Marcel Fixard, who died very shortly after this very special marriage, and very shortly after acquiring digitaline under a false identity, using a falsified prescription.
Très peu de temps aussi avant l'acquisition de digitaline sous une fausse identité, de fait, à l'aide d'une ordonnance falsifiée.
The judge wanted to know for sure. He had Marcel Fixard's body exhumed 6 years after his death. There may still have been traces of the poison in his viscera.
There were bits and pieces, I'd say, of molecules, because everything was degraded. And we can always say that a fraction of a molecule comes from such and such a toxicant, but without any certainty. And from the moment you can't say it's definitely digitalis, well, you have to cast a doubt. I casted my doubts because I couldn't be sure, given the state of degradation of the products I'd analyzed. I couldn't say yes, that really must be it.
There was doubt, but this did not prevent Judge Thiel from charging Simone a second time with the poisoning of Marcel Fixard. There was no proof, but there was at least a motive. Greed. She made a false will herself. She inherited all his property. The house in Rosières, a well-filled bank account. Financially, she was out of the woods. The Fixard family was dispossessed of its inheritance.
If we hadn't had to investigate the Bernard Hettler affair, Simone Weber would still have been able to live happily in her little house in Rosières-aux-Salines, enjoying Marcel Fixard's possessions and even benefiting from his retirement pension.
For the press, the case was relaunched. Just think, the devil is also a poisoner, a liar, a trickster, a Machiavellian. Such a dark depiction.
The Fixard affair, which came on top of, or as an extension of, the Hettler affair, helped to demonize her. People were saying, "This is a woman who makes people disappear. Hettler is nowhere to be found. He has probably passed away." And then she was indicted at the time. They were indictments with Fixard's death this time. So, the media said, "You see, nobody's wrong. She's really someone who's harmful, who kills people in her environment when they no longer fit in with what she wants." I don't know. In any case, it was demonization.
So here was a woman who may have killed 2 men. More and more disturbing elements were emerging. But in the first man's body, no poison. As for the second, there simply was no body. What's more, she still claimed to be innocent. For the judge, the priority was to find Bernard Hettler's body, at any price. 1 year after Bernard Hettler's disappearance, the police, increasingly certain that they had the culprit, were still looking for that damned evidence. And the best proof of all would be finding the body. At the time, Gilbert Thiel proved to be a very tenacious judge. He wanted to turn over the land of Marcel Fixard's house in Rosières-aux-Salines.
We used a mechanical excavator, small models, but still something quite substantial, to turn over a large part of the garden under the orders of the examining magistrate, Mr. Thiel. We had to check whether Simone Weber had buried anything related to the case, including, of course, human remains.
The house was also searched from top to bottom. For the occasion, they took Simone out of her prison. And before her very eyes, the oil tank was visited, bricks were loosened, walls dismantled, parquet, carpet, and tiles ripped up. Nothing. There was nothing in the garden, nothing in the house. And Simone quietly watched the policeman go the wrong way.
Meanwhile, Simone was unruffled, tranquil. If I were innocent and my house was being turned upside down like that, I'd be revolted. I don't know. When you've done nothing and your house is being looted and turned upside down like that, there's something to be revolted about. But Simone, for her part, let it happen without saying a word.
Investigators continued their search in the nearby cemetery. They discovered that the hatch to the ossuary was not closed. They could even make out garbage bags at the bottom of the hole.
We didn't think we'd find the whole body. It was so bulky. Instead, we thought we'd find debris, pieces of arms or legs, things that could have been cut up and left unnoticed in an ossuary.
Inspector Jacques remembers the search. It was like a descent into hell.
Once downstairs, I'll leave you to imagine the scene. There was a large concrete room with heaps and heaps of bones. Even some bone fragments with flesh on them. It was a horror vision you'd see in a horror movie.
Several bags with macabre remains were brought up and examined.
There was a lot of human debris, so we had to sort out the old from the new.
Experts examined them. Unfortunately, the remains discovered predated Bernard Hettler's disappearance. Meanwhile, the missing man's daughter, Patricia, watched the field excavations from afar and continued to play detective. A witness confided to her that he had seen Simone at the end of June in Fugues, on the banks of the canal.
When I interviewed her relatives, they told me we saw her on such and such a day, near the canal, one morning, the car places like this, etc. One of Simone Weber's car was there at 4 a.m. Why? I don't think she was taking a bath in the canal, so there was something, she had thrown something.
As soon as he heard about it, Judge Thiel confirmed that he was ready to put his all into this investigation, that both awes and annoys him. He ordered the canal to be drained for 2 kilometers, no less, still searching for the corpse. And why not for the discs of the concrete grinder, which have never been found?
Can you imagine that they drained the canal in the village where I grew up until I was 17? And the land, well now there are some big trees, but he had the land turned over. He seized I don't know how many men from the regiment to come and turn over the land, to go and dig, turn over the wood they had dug up, etc., for days on end.
Pour venir retourner le terrain, pour aller fouiller, retourner les bois qu'ils ont pioché, qu'ils ont et tout pendant des jours.
It's not even conceivable.
Mais c'est même pas pensable.
With extensive research across a 167-meter-long tunnel and a large deposit of silt at the bottom of the Canal de Lay, the Justice Department is stopping at nothing to advance the investigation of the Hettler case. For 8 days, the water was diverted and it took 15 hours to empty reach number 13. And all day yesterday, 8 men meticulously excavated the silt despite the difficulties of the task. The result undoubtedly exceeded the magistrate's expectations. The detectives from the Criminal Investigation Department found 2 discs like this one from an angle grinder.
We found some discs, but they didn't match the tool Simone Weber had rented.
Thiel and the police were still certain that Simone Weber is guilty. They had no doubt about it, but they knew it would be very hard to get her convicted of a crime without a corpse. Then, 350 kilometers away in Poissy, near Meaux, a certain Marcel Rabot made a miraculous catch. Like every Sunday, he came to the edge of this dead branch of the Marne, reputed to be full of fish, with his boat, going upstream.
When I got to the leaning tree, because there's still that tree, it's been there for years, I saw a suitcase on the water. I was reeling in a suitcase. And that suitcase, it was huge, huge. I turned the boat around, came back to the suitcase, hooked it up, and came back to my fishing spot, with the suitcase hooked up to my boat. It was the smell that intrigued me a little. The smell, and then afterwards, when I started to take the suitcase, I saw that it had a belt, and then a weight. It was weighted. It seemed a bit strange to me.
A cinder block was attached to the suitcase handle. To reel it in, Marcel Rabot enlisted the help of 2 other fishermen.
We pulled out the suitcase, and a little pinkish juice came out of it at the same time. A pinkish juice, which stank. So I said, "We're not touching it. We'll put it here, and then we're not touching it." And I waited. The other 2 fishermen went to fetch the gendarmes, and I'm waiting for them.
The gendarmes thought they'd find the corpse of an animal in the suitcase, a dog or perhaps a pig thrown into the water. A policeman opened the suitcase and discovered garbage bags.
He took a cutter and opened the bag, the first one. Then he saw there was a second one, still taped up. Then he took a cutter and put it inside. And then he felt that it was soft inside. That's when he talked about it being a pig. And then he cut it open, and we saw it was decomposing. But we saw, and that's when we saw a butt. You could definitely see it was someone's butt. It wasn't a pig. It was just a human trunk. No more head, no more arms, no more legs, just the whole trunk together.
This bloody suitcase remained a mystery for over 9 months. This corpse did not correspond to any other disappearance in the Paris region. According to the autopsy, the body was that of a man in his 50s, cut up by a mechanical device. A mechanical device? This eventually attracted the attention of the investigators and the judge in Nancy.
When Poincy's trunk was discovered, expert appraisals were carried out. It didn't say Bernard Hettler on it, and he didn't have his ID card in his pocket. So we had to try, using the techniques available at the time, to see if it could be matched, if there were any elements of exclusion, so that we could draw the consequences. And if there were no elements of exclusion, we'd try to establish more effective elements of identification.
Without fingerprints or dental impressions, identification is difficult. Hopefully, Bernard Hettler's pelvis and spine had been x-rayed. They compared the pictures with the trunk of Mr. X, discovered in Poincy.
In Mr. X's case, the X-ray of the pelvis showed a number of anomalies on the foot of the sacroiliac joint, which were also present on Mr. Hettler's X-ray. First similarity. Second point, here, you see, there's what we call the ischium. You sit on these. Well, you see, here, there are little, shall we say, anomalies that are, well, age-dependent, gender-dependent. Well, we found the same thing with Mr. Hettler.
Here, at last, was the centerpiece we've been waiting for. Bernard Hettler's corpse had finally been found.
You're going to ask me, how much of a percentage were you pretty sure it was the same? Let's say, I don't know, but in hindsight, it was close to 99.9, to give you an idea. It was very, 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 very similar.
But doubt is always possible. And Simone Weber's lawyers were exploiting this doubt to the full.
Was it Bernard Hettler's? When we know that this trunk had a scar following an appendicitis operation, this was what the autopsy of this bloody trunk had shown, whereas Bernard Hettler had never, according to his medical records and the indications given by his close family, undergone appendicitis. So it's not clear why this trunk would be his.
Whether Bernard Hettler underwent such an operation will never be fully clarified. Only identification by genetic fingerprinting could have ended the debate. At the time, it was impossible. But the police still had one more lead to explore. A few drops of blue paint.
The trunk was weighted down with cinder blocks, similar to the one here in the garden. And on this block, we can see traces of blue paint, similar to the one here, which was used to paint the roof overhang. And during our subsequent investigation, we interviewed the painter who carried out the work in Marcel Fixert's house. And at the time of the paint job, there were some cinder blocks downstairs, which had been there before he arrived, and there were paint drips on these.
Inspector Christian Jacques cut off a piece of the roof overhang to recover a sample of blue paint. Cinder blocks were seized in the garden, and yet another forensic examination was requested. This time, analysis of the chemical composition of the paints provided a decisive answer.
The analysis of the blue paint on the cinder block used to weight the suitcase was the same composition as the paint in Simone Weber's house. Under the paint, I found sand seeds that were the same grains of sand as those in Simone Weber's garden too.
For us, it's very important because it proves that Simone Weber used the Rosiers-UX Salines blocks to weight down Poincy's trunk, thus making the link between Poincy's corpse and the Rosiers-UX Salines house and Simone Weber. So for us, this was a major breakthrough in the Bernard Hettler case.
The police figured out a possible scenario. Simone Weber shot Bernard Hettler to death with a rifle in her Avenue de Strasbourg apartment. She cut up the corpse with a grinder, placing the pieces in trash bags and the trunk in a suitcase. A week later, she drove to her daughter's home in Épinay-sur-Seine to forge the work certificate. On the way, She threw the suitcase into the Marne, weighted down with cinder blocks taken from Rosière. Patricia Hettler was convinced by this scenario, and even convinced that her father ended his life in his own suitcase lent to Simone Weber.
When I saw the suitcase, I immediately recognized the suitcase he had at home. He'd bought 2 identical suitcases, and I knew it was the same one. And well, actually, I was relieved to have found something after all. I was relieved that we'd been able to salvage something. Atrocious as it was, we'd still salvaged something. And now, it's true, at that moment, the hatred had set in. Hatred, revenge.
It's true that we had some really blatant, damning clues then. But we were still missing that damned proof, something that would be indisputable. Ideally, of course, we'd like a confession. So now, in Judge Thiel's place, with Simone, I'd play it eye to eye.
When you accuse people of cutting off arms, legs, etc., well, you at least have to prove it, and they refuse to prove it. So, he's a moral murderer, a bandit.
The one she calls the bandit is Gilbert Thiel, her examining magistrate. The chess match between Thiel and Weber lasted almost 5 years, a record time for an investigation. The accused remained in prison for 5 years, 5 years of pretrial detention, and the defense lawyers were crying foul. Would you say today that the judge was too relentless?
I'd say it was an exemplary instruction. For 5 years, the investigating magistrate, with the full support of the public authorities, i.e., with the support of the highly competent judicial police officers who worked constantly on his behalf.
Of course, that's their job.
They worked constantly on his behalf, almost devoted to this case. And then, above all, he used the whole arsenal, the whole scientific and technical arsenal, to try to find even the slightest hint of evidence to incriminate Ms. Weber. It's worth noting that this affair has cost French taxpayers several million francs. You get the feeling that Miss Weber, my colleagues and I were a bit like bare-knuckle fighters against the armored divisions of the public authorities that were desperate to find a clue making her guilty.
They said I was bent on finding out. Yes, I was bent on finding out, but not on Simone Weber. It's a bit like going to the doctor. I sure hope he'll bend on finding what illness you have, and not dispatch you in a blick.
He wanted the truth, but Simone Weber wouldn't break down. No confession, never.
It was a constant battle between Gilbert Thiel and Simone Weber, because the more he insisted, the more she denied. And it had become a kind of game for Simone Weber. It had become a kind of game. She lied, he showed her lying. She lied again, he took her lie apart. It was a game.
I hope he'll give credence to my statements, because it's unthinkable to keep someone so innocent. This is the worst crime that justice can commit.
Judge Thiel had before him someone who was quite formidable, because all the most obvious elements were denied or confused. Consequently, every little thing had to be checked and double-checked, which inevitably led to a multiplicity of acts.
Are you innocent?
Yes, sir, I am innocent.
I would say that denial, whatever the case, whether the person in question is innocent or guilty, it doesn't matter. Denial is a defense system that is expressly permitted by law. I find it unacceptable for someone to say, as an examining magistrate or public prosecutor, in any case as someone involved in the prosecution, I find it completely unnatural for someone to say, you're forcing me to work, you're forcing me to carry out investigations, because you're not providing me with the cooked-up story. You've got to have some nerve to come up with arguments like that.
It would be so simple if she would talk, if she would confess, if she would tell, if she would be able to explain. We had a crime still without a corpse, a poisoning without poison, and only a few false papers. In criminal court, that wouldn't be enough.
It was Simone Weber's behavior that led to the length of the investigation, both in terms of her behavior prior to the events, at the time of the events, and all the machinations that may have taken place, but also subsequently during the investigation, hence the length of the investigation. And perhaps also the involvement of a number of lawyers at her side.
For Simone Weber is a lawyer devourer. The biggest names in the Nancy, Paris, and Marseille bars offered their services. More than 25 lawyers paraded through her prison visiting room. And one of the key players was Maître Vergès, who was staging a high-profile defense.
In Nancy today, Simone Weber's lawyers intended to carry out a savage reconstruction, and yes, that's the term, of the crime of which she is accused, i.e. the murder of her lover.
Everything was ready for the famous reenactment that some were already calling a black mass. In the role of the victim, a freshly smothered chicken, a concrete chainsaw which Simone Weber is supposed to have used to cut up her lover's body, and to authenticate the staging, a bailiff.
The aim of the operation was to prove that it's impossible to cut up a body in this small apartment without leaving traces of blood everywhere. The police found no suspicious stains, but the judge objected to the staging. He had the apartment door sealed.
We can see no other explanation for the position of these seals than the judge's desire to prevent the defenders, in a private place, from engaging in an experiment that would have disproved the accusation against Ms. Weber.
The wind soon died down because it was purely and simply media defense, not to say a chaotic one.
De la défense purement et simplement médiatique, pour ne pas dire chaotique.
It was a demonstration more akin to a circus than to the administration of legal evidence.
And in front of the journalists, Maître Jacques Vergès summed up the Weber affair with a shocking phrase.
I'm convinced that Simone Weber is innocent, and at this point he used the kind of shock wording that Vergès comes up with from time to time, saying that Judge Thiel wanted Simone Weber to be a sort of mix between Marie Bernard's ovaries and Landru's balls.
De Simone Weber, une espèce de croisement entre les ovaires de Marie Bénard et les couilles de Landru.
Dame Weber, as Maître Vergès called her, found the phrase daring and dubious, so he was dismissed in his turn. One more lawyer. As for the experiment of cutting up a piece of meat in the defendant's apartment, Judge Thiel ended up organizing it himself a few months later.
I think it gives you an idea, I have to say, of the lack of seriousness of certain acts. Cutting a pork leg into slices in an old apartment lined with oilcloth, what does that prove? So there was no grease stain, which allegedly meant that it was perfectly possible to cut. Come on, there are a whole lot of acts like that seem completely unbelievable to me.
I went as far as I could, and I was saying to myself, and I'm going to say it clearly, it's better to have a case where we've pushed the investigations as far as we can until we're no longer making any headway, because time is a given in judicial phenomena and the judicial process, rather than saving 6 months, 8 months, or a year and sending back a job half done. Because here, these same lawyers who complained with their client and in unison with her, and they were right to, well, they would have been the first to say, wait, your case is botched. They said everything, except that it was botched.
Faced with the judge's actions, the lawyers were counterattacking and multiplying their appeals.
It wasn't the judge who overdid it. It was obviously the lawyers who multiplied the requests for release, requests for acts, parallel reconstitutions, referral to the indictment division, as we used to say at the time, possible referral to a human rights court, etc., etc., etc. So there was a desire, in a kind of judicial ping-pong, to delay the deadline, hoping perhaps that the length of the investigation would work to their client's advantage.
Que cette longueur d'instruction va jouer au bénéfice de leur cliente.
But the judge wouldn't give up, fearing that once released, Simone Weber might destroy evidence or put pressure on witnesses. The indictment chamber ruled in his favor, and the accused remained in pre-trial detention. The judge and the accused would come face to face 75 times. A real game of cat and mouse.
When I would go to the trial, I'd be happy, because I would think that when the judge heard me, he would understand that I wasn't guilty and set me free.
In those days, you called him honey.
As the matron saw that I was looking forward to going to see the judge, they would say to me, "There's your beloved who wants to see you. Go see your honey."
I've never been able to get her to say anything bad about the judge who sent her to trial. She even told us she liked you.
Elle nous a même dit qu'elle vous aimait bien.
Yes.
Are you surprised?
No, not really, because we had sometimes tumultuous relations in the context of a rather prolonged encounter, as it lasted 4.5 years in terms of the preparatory investigation, with someone who defended themselves as they wanted, as best as they could. But let's just say that our relationship has sometimes been tense, sometimes relaxed.
She told us about an episode that clearly had a huge impact on her. One day, you took her from her prison to the grave, I believe. Of her children, one of her children's grave.
I did. It wasn't just one day. We had to go 4 or 5 times with police inspectors Jacques and Lamboulaye, since she had asked me, during an interrogation, to be allowed to visit her mother's grave and the graves of her children.
It was cold, a terrible wind. I even gave him my arm to be close by, and we talked about the affair, just as we're talking about it with you.
I told her, "Ms. Weber, this is between us. I don't want your lawyers to know about this, because I was afraid that one day, photographers from rotten magazines would come out like devils from their box behind a tombstone and photograph the judge and the accused, as they used to say in those days, at the cemetery."
Ça n'existait pas à l'époque encore, mais ne sortent comme des diables de leur boîte derrière une pierre tombale et photographient, parce que ça se vend. Le juge et l'inculpé, on disait comme ça, au cimetière.
Without a lawyer, that's not very legal. It's out of procedure.
No, yes, it was out of procedure. I wasn't investigating. I wasn't there with my clerk and my typewriter.
Didn't you ask her a single question about the case?
I certainly did not.
These two strong heads had been facing each other several times a month for many years by then, and I think it would be wrong to reduce their relationship to one of affectionate complicity. Thiel knew where he wanted to go. He's a judge, not a confidant.
He also became increasingly rigid in his contacts and relations with her, just as she increasingly retreated into a form of muteness or silence. It's certain that these relationships have been gradually altered all the same. And the longer the question from the examining magistrate, the shorter the answer from Ms. Weber.
At the time of the final questioning, known as the summing up, she declared, "I won't answer anymore. All you have to do is bring me the rope to hang myself." The investigation thus ended in silence on the part of the accused. Her trial was scheduled for January 1991.
What I have to say is this: she was prosecuted for the murder of Bernard Hettler and, incidentally, of Mr. Fixard. So the subject was relatively precise. I'm saying that it doesn't take 6 years to prove someone guilty in a case involving 2 murders.
Dans une affaire où 2 meurtres sont en cause, eh bien, il ne faut pas 6 ans.
I think that's pretty clear.
Ça paraît être quelque chose de clair.
If you need to quibble for 6 years to try and prove that someone is guilty, then that person is most certainly not guilty.
Que cette personne-là, très certainement, n'est pas coupable.
It doesn't take 6 years to prove simple things like that.
When you practice the empty chair policy, it's happened a number of times. Simone Weber faked ailments that were authenticated as false by the experts I brought in. When you lodge complaints against your judge for infringement of liberties and requests for legitimate suspicion, in other words, when you play the man, as they say, it's hardly surprising that there's some slowness and slowdown in the follow-up and normal course of normal proceedings.
Dans le suivi et le déroulement normal d'une procédure normale.
That was it. The investigation was over. And Thiel hadn't been able to break Simone. She stood in court on 13 counts. Assassination, poisoning, theft, forgery, destruction of evidence, use of false license plates, possession of explosives, you name it. Here she was, in front of her jury. Here was to hoping she'd speak, so people could finally know and understand. On January 17, 1991, the Meurthe-et-Moselle Assize Court opened its doors to an exceptional trial. 6 weeks of hearings were scheduled, with dozens of witnesses and experts expected to take the stand. 100 journalists were announced. A show trial for an extraordinary woman.
In around 20 years of courts, this is the longest trial I've ever attended. This was a trial in which some 180 people were expected to testify either as witnesses, experts, or in other capacities. It was monstrous.
We were delighted to get it started. We'd had enough of such antics and theatrics. She had to be sentenced and the family had to be relieved.
I trusted the law. I thought, we'll find out. She'll crack. She'll let some things go. Maybe we'll find out more. At least we'll be avenged. We'll have that satisfaction.
I was convinced that in Bernard Hettler's case, she would be convicted because there was indisputable material evidence.
I've always believed in the acquittal of Simone Weber, both in the Hettler and Fixard cases.
Simone Weber, aussi bien en ce qui concerne l'affaire Hettler que l'affaire Fixard.
Simone Weber entered the judicial arena under the camera flashing lights. With her white blouse, gold cross around her neck, and carefully concealed handcuffs, Nancy's devil is the flawless face of innocence.
The Simone Weber trial. Today in Nancy, Francois Foucard. The floor is for the defense. The defense, this morning, was first and foremost Simone herself. Too much to say to be able to say it, something derisory and pathetic. I never murdered anyone.
François Foucard, everyone who listened to you at the time still remembers a sort of crush on this woman. True or false?
D'une sorte de coup de cœur pour cette femme. Vrai ou faux?
Quite. I was one of the first to call her Simone, quite simply. She provoked some. Not passion, that would be ridiculous.
Affection?
Not affection either, but I thought it was such an interesting case. We saw a little bourgeoise from the provinces, then with a very well done tuck, all curly, a tight bodice, she's all powdered, she has a necklace, you'd almost expect her to wear a veil or gloves. Anyway, a small provincial lady who was accused of a terrible crime.
A little provincial lady, perhaps. If only there wasn't that glare, those blue eyes that shoot out like lightning.
I remember a glare with such intensity.
Un regard d'une intensité.
I think she was a little dazzled by the spotlight from the TVs and cameras. But still, a sort of bird of prey look that gauged the whole room, that took possession of this court and, in a way, announced the challenge.
Qui prenait un peu possession de cette cour d'assises, et qui, d'une certaine manière, annonçait le défi.
When her gaze met those of the civilian parties, a clash was bound to happen.
For in the front row was the Hettler family, the sisters and daughters of the missing man, who faced the defendant throughout the proceedings. Simone Weber held their gaze, unblinking.
Justice likes to see a little emotion, even a lowering of the eyes. Why not a noose around the neck? Whereas here, we were dealing with a defendant who stood firm, even more than that.
You could see she was ready for a fight. She's here to win a battle. And what's astonishing is to think that this trial lasted the duration of a war, the Gulf War.
January 17th also marked the start of Operation Desert Storm, with the Allies bombing Iraq. Transistor in ear, journalists were following these first hours of war. In the boxing ring, however, the accused managed to captivate people. She took the fight to the front line. Instead of her lawyers, she decided to turn down herself the jurors who didn't suit her. In principle, you don't do that in court.
Well, it was the first time since Laval, it seems, that a defendant had chosen her jurors.
Une accusée choisissait ses jurés.
If that seems abnormal to society, I don't see what's abnormal about it. When I don't like someone, when they don't look like someone I can trust, I'm not going to go and happily tickle them.
Simone Weber wanted to turn them down herself. I was completely against it, but my excellent colleagues didn't want to take a stand. So she did it, and I think that was a pretty serious first misstep.
It's particularly atmospheric when you see the accused using her fingertips to turn down the juror because basically she doesn't like his face.
After 5 years in prison and forced silence, Simone took charge of her defense, transforming the court into a grandstand.
President Paco, who conducted the proceedings with great skill, decided to let her speak. And he was right. So he very rarely interrupted her. Some people even complained, saying she talks too much. But that was fine. She talked, and Simone Weber, at a certain point, could give the false impression, because she was being tricked, of leading the debate. She would compliment or scold people. She would take one witness to task and insult another.
What? What's with that bimbo? What's with that poacher insulting me? Good for nothing, loser. Everyone was having a good time. It was extraordinary.
Very quickly, she went off the rails, calling everyone names. And she even insulted the plaintiff, which is unacceptable. We never see the accused take it out on the victims either. Here she does.
I felt like I was in a play where all she was allowed to do was talk. She was allowed to talk any way she wanted. She was allowed to insult people. All the people who took the stand as witnesses, as relations, were soiled. For me, it's sullying people's lives. It's putting people on trial instead of Simone Weber.
Her first husband's testimony turned into a domestic dispute. He accused her of forcibly locking him up, and she called him a crook. Faced with the accusations, Simone Weber struck back.
She was prioritizing her will to settle scores with witnesses she couldn't stand, to the detriment of her trial. And for example, when the neighbors of the apartment she lived in came to testify, or the elders, the witnesses she had met in her childhood, people she considered mediocre, for good or bad reasons, that's not the point. But in any case she considered them mediocre, she poured out all her recrimination, reproaches, grievances on these witnesses. It did her a disservice, because the more you criticized the witness, the more it added, consequently, the more it denigrated her, the more it distorted the truth. Moreover, the more it distorted the testimony, so that it became incriminating testimony.
I think she put her lawyers on the spot several times, because she wanted to have the last word and was interventionist. And maybe some of her lawyers were afraid of upsetting her by saying, "Be quiet." A lawyer has to control his client and tell her, "This is what's in your interest." And so Simone was at times, in my opinion, difficult to control. It sure wasn't easy being Simone Weber's lawyer.
Geographically, Ms. Weber was situated on a bench above that of her defenders, so every time she wanted to say something to them, she had to stand up, bend over and bend a lot.
Et donc, à chaque fois qu'elle voulait leur dire quelque chose, elle était obligée de se lever, de se pencher, et de se pencher beaucoup.
So she found an easier way, which was to bend over a little and pull the dress by the collar of one of her lawyers to get his attention and say something.
De l'un de ses avocats pour lui attirer son attention et lui dire quelque chose.
So, depending on the urgency of the matter, it could be more or less brutal.
Simone Weber's behavior fascinated journalists and the public alike, and soon crowds were pouring through the gates of the court. From then on, the trial was a sellout.
Not only was the room crowded, but there were also people waiting in the other room at the doorway. It was very difficult to assess.
Just imagine, we were forced to put up metal barriers outside the Court of Appeal to form access corridors to the Court of Appeal, so that people leaving the hearing at midday would grab a sandwich in the French fry shack opposite and immediately queue up again to gain access to the courtroom at 2 p.m.
Sandwich dans la cabane à frites en face et immédiatement refaisaient la queue pour pouvoir accéder à la salle à 14 heures.
It was really crazy.
Hustle and bustle at the Nancy court. Tickets to Simone Weber's trial are at a premium. The most cautious people arrive almost an hour before the doors open. There are hardly more than 150 seats, so many will follow the debate standing up.
There were practically riots every day because people couldn't get in. It was the first big lengthy trial, and I'd say the first big show trial.
It really was like going to the theater. People came for Simone Weber's good lines and left disappointed if they hadn't heard the right little phrase or funny line during the hearing.
There were neighbors from the Strasbourg district in Nancy and people from Rosières. And then there were all these people who'd read all the reports and who'd come to see Simone's fall, who'd come to see the murderer.
Quasiment la mise à mort de Simone, qui venait voir la meurtrière, et il y avait vraiment de la haine à son égard. Et on sentait à mort.
Because she had established herself as the star of her trial, it was no longer the facts that were on trial. It was her, all of her, the devil. Her lawyers denounced a witchcraft trial.
To begin with, the role of defendant is the worst. I'm not telling you anything new with this. It's clear that in the box, you're already off to a bad start. When you've been in pretrial detention for 5.5 years, it's clear that the presumption of innocence to which you're entitled is quite dented. And people sure are not going to forgive you in particular. If one of the lawyers is aggressive, you think he's got a lot of punch. If one of the witnesses is offensive, you think he's not impressed by the court. If the accused defends herself vigorously, she's said to be a terrible woman. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. And it's true that there was this phenomenon, and that every time she attacked someone, it came back to bite her. That's for sure, you can't argue with that.
Everyone who attended the trial says pretty much the same thing. Everyone says you overdid it. You should have kept a little lower profile. We saw you.
I was responding to what the court president asked me. I never interrupted. I never caused a scene.
But you took charge of this trial from the first minute to the last, and God knows how long it lasted.
I did.
You were leading it.
No, the journalists wrote that. I was simply responding to the chairman when he gave us the floor every time. It's written in the criminal judgment, gave the floor to.
And when they gave it, you took it.
Well, yes, I was explaining, like now.
Often, defendants at trial sit in the box and let their lawyers do the talking. While you did a lot more talking than your lawyers. You'd cut the lawyer off, asking him to sit down.
But he didn't say anything. He wasn't defending me. Listen, my son came in a hurry from Berlin. They let me see him, and he said to me, "But Mom, can't you see that they're letting you be condemned? But Mom, you're going to get a life sentence."
On the stand, the parade of witnesses testifying on Simone Weber's behalf was impressive. Neighbors, fellow inmates, and family members came to accuse the accused. But regarding the alleged crimes, there was still very little. The press denounced an obese trial in which useless talking attempted to mask the flaws in the prosecution's case.
In the two cases presented, the poisoning case had virtually nothing to go on. And so it was in this one that they tried to bring in a host of witnesses to try and make it stand up in spite of everything.
If they had limited it to witnesses who could provide objective testimony on the facts, how many people would we have heard from? Not many.
In the Fixard case, Simone Weber confessed to the forged will and the modified prescriptions. But physical evidence of her second husband's poisoning was still lacking.
As the hearing progressed, it quickly became clear that Simone Weber wasn't risking much on the Fixard case.
In the third week of the trial, we finally got to the heart of the matter with the disappearance of Bernard Hettler. In this case, too, everything would depend on the jury's deep conviction.
There was no confession, and in criminal law, a confession is the queen of evidence. Then, there was no complete corpse, but there is a series of incriminating elements that had been accumulated by the judge throughout the investigation.
First, the story of Marie Hague, the neighbor on Avenue de Strasbourg, which made a strong impression. In front of Simone, she recounted the noise of the engine, the garbage bags being moved, the smell of blood. But what overwhelmed Simone Weber at the hearing is everything she did in the days following Bernard Hettler's disappearance.
If he had disappeared, why hide the truth? Why lie? Why use so many stratagems? Why leave? See her daughter whom she hadn't seen for 2 years, have false medical certificates drawn up, make phone calls with people pretending to be Bernard Hettler. She had to be willing to hide something. This something was the nature of Bernard Hettler's disappearance. And there was only one person who could do that, her.
She had already signed her crime. On June 22, 1985, when no one knew where Bernard was, she had Monique Nuss, Bernard Hettler's friend, call and say he won't be coming home tonight. Only she knew he wouldn't be coming home tonight because she had killed him.
The motive for the crime: spite and love. The president of the court read letters written by Simone Weber to her former lover. So she had been in love.
Many letters had been found. She wrote a lot. Either we found letters that she had sent, or we found drafts of letters in which she shared, in a quite poignant manner, her disappointment. Truly a deep disappointment. Her sorrow. She was truly in love with this man. You could hear her suffering. And, well, that's understandable, but on the other hand, she wrote about resentment. And she systematically wrote her reproaches to Bernard Hettler.
Simone wrote, "I wouldn't have thought that at this age, one could love and suffer so much again. Will my heart always have to be in pieces? I'm in so much pain, my soul is ready for the worst." In a letter to her sister Madeleine, she warned, "Tonight I'm going to make the other guy pay for the wrong he did to me." Who was she talking about? Simone Weber said, "I don't remember." But everyone is thinking, of course, of Bernard Hettler.
All these testimonial and material elements were totally interwoven, and there was no possibility of believing that she was actually innocent. In fact, I had the impression that her attitude had changed. She herself must have realized that, as she had said in a letter to her sister, she was done for, totally done for.
The public prosecutor called for life imprisonment with an 18-year definitive sentence. "Life imprisonment is worse than death," said Simone Weber. Next, it was the turn of the bigwigs of the bar to clash. On the prosecution side, they detailed the logic of the crimes, while Simone Weber's defenders pleaded a case oozing with plot holes. After 31 days of hearings, tensions were running high. Just before the finale, Simone Weber collapsed. She left the courthouse on a stretcher. The verdict resounded in the court while she wasn't there.
I'd heard from Mr. Garrett that she decided to do a comedy, which she did. And she came back. She came back to the hearing, like that, between two guards, as if she were going to die, as if she was on the verge of fainting, panting. And Garrett told me, yes, I think she wants to come back to make people feel sorry for her.
Was this her latest bluff?
It was.
Simone Weber didn't want to hear her sentence. She didn't want to. That's how I interpret it. She didn't want to. It was over. She'd been the star for several weeks, or so she thought. And then it came to an end, and it's all over. For several days then, she'd been feeling that it was over, that the lights were going to be turned off. She didn't want to hear it.
We now have the verdict.
Yes, absolutely, Mark. The verdict came in just a few minutes ago. The Murdy Timozel court sentenced Simone Weber to 20 years imprisonment.
After 11 hours of deliberation, the jurors delivered their verdict. Yes, Simone Weber killed Bernard Hettler, but the jury admit extenuating circumstances, and surprisingly, despite the rental of the concrete grinder, no premeditation. A murder of passion, therefore, which enables her to escape a life sentence. No, she didn't poison Marcel Fixard. She was acquitted of the second crime.
Simone Weber learned of her conviction on her hospital bed.
The trial bailiff solemnly delivered the verdict.
Her first reaction, I remember, was to ask me about the behavior of the crowd in the room. That's what caught her attention in the first place. That's what really surprised me. And I also remember her handing me a box of sweets, offering me one, which I refused.
Weren't you there in the moment of the verdict?
No.
How did it go? Try telling us about the scene.
I know I didn't cry or scream or yell. I just stayed there. I spent an afternoon not thinking I'd be condemned at all. I didn't think I'd be condemned at all. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't at all anxious about the wait. Oh no, not at all.
And after the announcement you'd go to prison for 20 years, you were sentenced to 20 years of criminal imprisonment, weren't you stunned?
It's not that I was not stunned. They told me I was acquitted in the Fixar case, as I didn't kill Mr. Fixar either. I thought, they can't acquit me for both. You see, I'm broad-minded.
That verdict makes her much more human. A woman of passion. A woman of passion, yet undeniably a murderer since she's been convicted of it.
Meurtrière, puisqu'elle est condamnée pour ça.
But less calculating, and therefore less diabolical than we had liked to see her for 6 weeks.
Qu'on avait bien voulu la voir pendant 6 semaines.
Madeleine Weber is sentenced to 18 months in prison for destroying Bernard Hettler's passport and checkbook. Judge Thiel welcomed the conviction of the two Weber sisters with a touch of satisfaction.
When I heard that Simone Weber had been convicted, I thought that's good. That's good, not because she had 20 years of criminal imprisonment, but because other people, a collegiality, had the same vision of things as me, and somewhere it was a kind of. Not relief, because the term would be completely misinterpreted. But after all that has been said, after all that has been done, I finally could say I didn't get it all wrong.
On reading the verdict, Patricia Hettler broke down. For 6 years, she had been fighting to find her father, to see that Simone Weber is punished. As far as she is concerned, this judicial outcome is derisory.
I fell apart because I was outraged. I think that having left her with extenuating circumstances, not to acknowledge her guilt in the death of her false husband, as one might say, and for Dad, only 20 years, knowing that there would be remissions, of course. I was disappointed. I'm disappointed because it was lenient to her. And as far as I'm concerned, I didn't get what I wanted, for her to pay for what she did, for the atrocity she committed. And I'm very disappointed. To me, in my head, I was thinking, but when she gets out, I don't know, I'll kill her, I'll pounce on her. To me, she didn't deserve to live anymore. She had ruined our lives, ruined everything for us. To end up in prison, to end her days there, it was too good an ending for her.
So what are the key arguments you have at your disposal today to show us that you are innocent?
Vous avez à votre disposition pour nous démontrer que vous êtes innocente.
When Bernard disappeared, there were 2 articles noting his disappearance in the newspapers. And after I was arrested, very shortly afterwards, I have the dates at home, his house had the doors broken into. The visitors turned over everything in his room, the box spring standing against the wall, the bed at the end of the room, everything was turned over. But those people who were looking for something, what were they looking for? Something that had to be removed, hidden.
That's your key argument today, to say that the investigation was botched.
Oh yes, and then they didn't take any organ samples to consider genetic expertise.
Fait de prélèvements d'organes pour envisager de faire une expertise génétique.
When my lawyers and I asked for it, he did it about 2 years later.
Il l'a fait à peu près 2 ans après.
So he left the trunk to rot instead of taking the samples.
Au lieu de faire les prélèvements.
And those that had been taken, the very few that had been taken, have been stolen.
Qui ont été faits ont été volés.
But why? Who stole them? What are they hiding?
Qu'est-ce que ça cache?
There must be something to it. Those samples didn't escape on their own.
Simone Weber was released from prison in 1999 after 14 years. She joined her sister Madeleine, settled in the sunny Côte d'Azur. She still denies having killed Bernard Hettler.
I think that, for her, it's the only way to exist.
C'est sa seule façon d'exister.
Acknowledging her guilt today would mean calling into question at least a good third of her existence.
Ça veut dire remettre en cause au moins un bon tiers de son existence.
In particular, all the time she spent in prison, she continued to claim her innocence.
Those who change their minds are like those who convert at the moment of death. This is what Simone Weber said at the end of her trial. So was she Nancy's devil or a good lady? She holds the key to the mystery.
Now she's just an old woman, but is she totally vulnerable and harmless?
Totalement vulnérable et inoffensive.
She's got a lot of secrets.
The day you leave...
Vous partirez.
In the other world?
Yes. Will you be leaving with a secret?
Vous emporterez un secret.
No, no. I'll go to my children.
Non. J'irai retrouver mes enfants.
No secrets?
Not any.
You've said it all?
Yes. I wouldn't have fought that fight if I hadn't been innocent.
Cette bagarre-là, si j'avais pas été innocente. Mm-hmm.